Arab world is a loose yet complex amalgamation of 22 countries, in which a pan-Arab identity is the proclaimed ideal. Its citizens share a common language, a common history, and believe that they share a common destiny. But in its search for unity, Arab society has been pulled in opposite directions: past versus present, sacred versus secular, monarchy versus democracy. Between 1952 and 1970, the drive for Arab unity was at its strongest. This period gave new meaning to Arab nationalism. It was an age of solidarity and of the pursuit of unity through mass political movements. It was an era dominated by a leader, the likes of whom the Arabs had not seen in a long time. But can one person address the gap between the reality and the dream of unity? Cairo, the capital of Egypt, is the Arab world's largest city and home to over 15 million people, a center of culture and politics. It is often called the heart of the Arab world. For many, it is also the cradle of modern Arab nationalism. It was in Cairo that the idea of a unified Arab nation found its greatest expression. It is impossible to talk of Arab unity without referring to the Arab Nasserite movement, founded by Gamal Abdel Nassera, the second president of the Egyptian Republic. Nasserism was once the most powerful political force in the region. Today, its influence is greatly diminished, but the fact that it has survived for 45 difficult years is a testament to the strength of its ideas and the popularity, even after death, of Nasser himself. At the Nasserite Party headquarters, preparations are underway to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the nationalization of the Suez Canal, which was a major turning point in the history of the Arab world. Nasser was the main protagonist in the struggle to free the canal from British control. And to Nasserites, there is no political alternative to Nasser's vision for Arab unity.
Our leader, Gamal Abdel Nassera, used to say that if Damascus is attacked, Cairo is affected. We are one Arab nation, from the ocean to the Gulf.
I strongly believe in the principles of Nasserism. These principles create a better world and will create a unified Arab world.
Nasserism is essential in creating a unity of Arab states through its people, not through the leadership. We believe that the will of the Arab people will achieve unity, not political coups.
The emergence of this era has a considerable history. At the end of World War II, colonialism still dominated large parts of the Arab world. Egypt was a monarchy under British rule. It was the base of British presence in the Middle East. In the years that followed, a number of sentiments led to a major revolt. Egyptian discontent at still being a colony was rising. More importantly, they were angry and humiliated. Their badly armed military had lost the 1948 war against Israel. Ordinary Egyptians felt marginalized by their leaders.
One explosion that expresses all this is, of course, the famous Cairo fire. Still very vague, but ultimately what we know about it is that whether there were direct instigators or not, but tens of thousands of Cairene took to the streets and put to fire and looting, especially the richer parts and the western parts of the city.
On the 23rd of July 1952, a group of Egyptian army officers, calling themselves the Free Officers Movement, took power in a bloodless coup. That night, officers seized control of all government buildings, radio stations, police stations, and the army headquarters in Cairo. At the forefront of the uprising was a charismatic young army officer recall Gamal Abdel Nassera. Nasser and his fellow officers assured Britain that it would respect British citizens and property in Egypt, limiting the possibility of intervention against the coup. The revolutionaries also bowed to American pressure by allowing the deposed King Farouk and his family to leave Egypt.
The coup d'etat moved from Cairo to Alexandria, encircled the royal palace, and issued an ultimatum to King Farouk to leave the country before 6 o'clock. I went out from my relative's house in Alexandria to the Mediterranean coast, to the Corniche, to see King Farouk's yacht, Al-Mahrousa, taking off with 21 gun salute to send him off. And that was a memorable day for me. It is etched in my memory as if it happened yesterday. And therefore I was there from day one, more or less, on the scene, seeing that, being moved by it, touched by it.
At that time, the British Army and Navy had bases still in the Suez Canal. And the Egyptians had started Fidai operation against them. So you had the demand for the evacuation of British troops, which was supposed to have taken place since the 1930s.
This was the first military coup to happen in the Arab world, and it set a precedent for many to follow. After assuming power, Nasser and the free officers formed the Revolutionary Command Council, which constituted the real power in Egypt. General Mohammed Najib became Egypt's first president. However, it soon became clear that the revolution was driven by the charisma of Nasser and his strong ideological notions. Conflict with Najib over strategies soon resulted in his removal. And in October of 1954, Nasser was appointed President of Egypt. He was the second native Egyptian to rule Egypt in over 2,500 years.
جمال عبد الناصر شخص من أبناء الشعب المصري العاديين، ليسوا من أبناء الطبقات العليا في المجتمع، ليسوا من الطبقات
Nasser was an ordinary man of the Egyptian people, not a man of the upper classes. He came from the working classes, and his father was a simple employee. His allegiance was always to the people. That's what made him strong. That's where he came from. That was his image.
انتماء لم يتخلله أي ضعف أو أي وهن أو أي تخلص منه.
Nasser set about changing Egypt. He had his own vision for both a new nation and the Arab world. Politically, he transformed Egypt into a republic, introducing centralized parliamentary rule. But he is better known for his domestic social programs. Nasser's aim was to improve the conditions of the peasant majority, establishing land reforms, free educational programs for boys and girls, and developing the country's medical infrastructure. This was a first in Egyptian history. Nasser's popularity grew rapidly. He was a man of the people. He spoke simply, in a way everyone could understand. He became the hero of the underclasses. He was a new kind of leader.
الناس ارتبطت بالأمل اللي بيحققه جمال عبد الناصر من انتصار.
They had hope in him,
واستعادة حقوق
hope in Gamal Abdel Nassera, hope to have their rights and dignity returned to them, big hopes to change their lives.
التطور اللي حدث في حياة الناس.
For example, I remember in my village, I was the only student. After a while, the schools were full, and many farmers were then educated. That gave people hope for the future, and all for free. That is what brought about rapid change.
Egypt was captivated, and the Arab world watched closely as Nasser expanded on his brand of socialism. He believed that if the people had real equality, they would feel more united and act as one entity.
One of the very early phrases that Nasser coined was addressing the common man. ارفع رأسك يا أخي فقد انتهى عهد الاستعمار. Raise your head, fellow brother. The end of colonialism had come. And that is the kind of language, message that echoed very deeply with the average man, because it was a simple language and people who were downtrodden, people who were being, beaten, mistreated, felt as worthless, began to gain that kind of confidence, spirit that they did not have before.
Never before had an Arab leader achieved such popularity outside his own capital. Rarely had the population of an underdeveloped Arab world felt that they could participate in the future of their own nations.
لأول مرة بيخرج زعيم مصري من أبناء الشعب المصري وليس من القوى الحاكمة الأصلية، فاقترب من قلوب العرب جميعا خارج الأقطار العربية. ابتدى يحصل لأول مرة تواصل مستمر بينه وبين القوى العربية المختلفة وتخاطب بينهم وبين بعض. اللغة أصبحت لغة قريبة من قلوب جميع العرب في كل مكان، ومن هنا ابتدت الأرضية تكون صالحة لإنبات عمل عربي ونشاط عربي مشترك.
Nasser's modern take on nationalism inspired Arabs in a way which the Nahda, the Arab Renaissance of the 19th century, hadn't. Nasserism had taken Arabism a step further. Even today, many feel that it was his leadership that united them in their quest for self-determination. He believed Arabs would be stronger if united, that they shared a common struggle against colonial powers, and that the liberation of Palestine should be an Arab duty.
Arab regimes have always only worked in their own interest, nothing else. They never thought about Arab unity. But the people in the Arab world, they feel united. Take Iraq. Whenever something happens over there are demonstrations and condemnations by the people all over the Arab world. Israeli aggressions on the Palestinians provoke the same reactions. This proves unity among Arab citizens.
On any Nasserite website on the internet, and there are many, there are pictures of Nasser, copies of speeches and articles about him. They are contemporary attempts to promote the idea of a united Arab world.
The feeling of nationalism is rooted deep inside us. This is Nasserism, freedom, socialism and unity. So we still need Nasserism, and no one can tell us that it's a thing of the past. On the contrary, it's what the Arab nation needs. It expresses the hopes and pains of us all.
It was this strategy and Nasser's vision that extended far beyond Egypt. Nasser believed that the lessons of the revolution should be applied in other Arab countries. His charisma and influence was so great that he inspired Arabs everywhere to dream of a unified Arab nation. His defiant attitude towards Egypt's former colonial masters made him even more popular. Nasserism swept the region.
He changed the Egyptians' feeling of hopelessness and despair to one of determination to make a better life for themselves and to make a better life for the whole region. That's what Nasser did, is to give Egyptians and later on Arabs that sense of dignity, a sense of worth, a sense that they could, in fact, make a difference on the world scene. That's what Nasser meant to my generation and to many around the Arab world and around the third world for that matter.
One of Nasser's main concerns was foreign occupation of Arab lands, and it was events surrounding this issue which led to a dramatic turn towards Arab unity. As early as 1954, he supported Algeria's struggle for independence from the French by providing arms and military training to Algeria's independence movement. But liberating his own nation from occupation proved to be one of the milestones of his career. In particular, Egypt's Suez Canal crisis is still remembered by most Arabs today. The British, who had originally agreed to remove their troops from the canal by 1954, still occupied it. At the same time, Egypt desperately needed electricity, and the Americans had promised Nasser over $200 million to build a hydroelectric power station in Aswan, known as the High Dam. But America was a strong ally of Israel, who by 1954 occupied large parts of Palestine. Nasser's opposition to Israel and what he saw as American and European colonialism, as well as his growing relationship with the communist bloc, angered Western powers. And so America refused to finance the dam. And in response, Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal on the 26th of July, 1956, and turned to the Soviets for financial aid. The British and French no longer controlled this vital seaway. The old colonial powers were humiliated.
It was fantastic. Of course, we finished, went out the street. It was late at night, it was summer. It was, I think, around probably 10 o'clock when we had finished dinner. Streets was full of demonstrations, of joy, people, cheering, and just, it was like a festival. It was like a feast, a moment of victory again.
What followed was military conflict between Egypt and a coalition of French, British, and Israeli forces. The operation to take the canal was a military success, but a political disaster for the coalition. The US, fearing Soviet intervention, imposed an end to the crisis, but allowed Israel to occupy the Sinai. Despite the military defeat, Nasser had forced the West into submission. The Arab world had a new hero.
The man won politically a major battle, which is the nationalization of the Suez Canal. And politically, the tripartite aggression, Israel, France, and Britain, was defeated by a Soviet veto, by the Americans simply not helping the British and the French. And Abdel Nasser, you would start loving Abdel Nasser, you would start feeling proud as an Egyptian, as an Arab, especially after 56.
The Arab world now felt it could rally behind a strong leader. Nasser's influence in the region rose dramatically. The effects of his revolution in Egypt soon spread to other Arab nations. The idea of Arab states uniting had begun to take shape. In 1958, the Iraqi Free Officers movement, modeled around Nasser's revolution, toppled the monarchy. At the outset, there was even talk about some form of unity with Egypt. However, this never materialized. In Lebanon, events in 1958 led to a minor civil war between the existing regime and more revolutionary currents influenced by Nasser's ideas. The US was asked to intervene. US forces landed on Beirut's shores in support of the local government. In the end, it was Nasser who brokered a political agreement among the warring factions. But the most notable spread of Nasserism in 1958 came in Syria. A power struggle erupted within the military between Baathists and Nasserites. Fearing their country might be divided, a group of Syrian army officers asked Nasser to join Egypt with Syria. At first, Nasser was extremely reluctant, as the two countries had different political systems. He preferred a federation of two states. With increasing pressure to find a rapid solution to Syria's situation, Nasser finally agreed, but stressed the two nations would be ruled on his terms. The United Arab Republic was born.
And again, it was another great victory for Egyptians, for Syrians, for the whole Arab world. And his speech on that occasion was such a moving speech on how this is a beginning of uniting the entire Arab world. And so we had hoped, we have dreams, we have aspirations, our enthusiasm skyrocketed, and that carried on until 1961.
The union with Syria was the first and most dramatic experiment of Arab unity since the idea first surfaced in the 19th century. A referendum was held in both countries, and Nasser was elected president. with Cairo designated as the capital of the newly formed United Arab Republic. Nasser then visited Damascus, where he received a tumultuous welcome. Arabs everywhere felt a new sense of pride.
I think all Egyptians wanted unity between Syria and Egypt. There was excitement about it, but at the same time there was apprehension that our local revolution would be slowed down by disunity. When Kouatli came over here, he wanted to speed up this unity before the repercussions could set in, but we were afraid of exactly this.
Well, those unions were not easy, first because they were looked upon as being mergers. They were looked upon as being something that will happen overnight. And specificity of each country was usually forgotten or simply underestimated in the name of what binds people together. So rather than go about gradually, then building unity, there was this dream that you can overnight move from partition to complete unity.
At the peak of his rule in the 1950s, Nasser was the most important leader in the Arab world. He had succeeded in uniting at least one Arab nation with another, and ruled over both. He had outmaneuvered the old colonial powers and hastened their decline, restoring to the Arabs long-lost feelings of pride, self-confidence, and above all, he managed to set the stage for the creation of an aspirational dream, a unified Arab world. The dream of Arab unity had taken a huge leap, but Nasser's very success bore within itself the seeds of danger. Things were soon to change.